Okay, so I've probably recorded this episode far too many times than I would have normally done, but I want to be sure that what I say in this is not inaccurate at all whatsoever, because the last thing I want to do is inflame a situation or make it worse, because that is definitely not my intention, that's not our intention, that's just not who we are. And aside from the fact that David Seymour and his supporters see you next Tuesdays, we just wanted to list out a few points that Kay and I had come up with in discussion and you know, over this whole fucking stupid treaty principles bill bullcrap. And we want to highlight some points, which I thought I'd do on this, as to why we think that ignoring or redefining the original Te Tiriti principles, as proposed in David Seymour's bill, could be seen as undemocratic for several reasons, because David Seymour is all about, you know, using democracy. So the original treaty principles, which have evolved over time, that have evolved through legal interpretation and sort of social consensus, which represent the agreement between the Crown and Māori. Not the Crown and Māori and the people of the Crown and everyone else that comes along in the future. This is the agreement between the Crown and the Māori. And let's face it, if you go to a job and get a new job contract, if you go get a mortgage or a business loan, anything that requires you to get a contract, you don't take your whole fucking neighbourhood with you and then sit there and listen to everything and let the whole fucking neighbourhood decide the terms and conditions of your contract that you must fill out and abide by. Because if you seriously think that the Māori people did that in the beginning, have you got rocks in your head? Because I don't know how the fuck you think that if someone was to come into your house and say, right, well, I like it here, so I'm going to stay, that you would turn around and go, oh, yeah, it is pretty nice here, eh? Alright, sweet. See you later. I'll pack up my shit and go. Yeah, okay. Like you're gonna fucking do that. Well, it's not really that much different. So, this agreement is not between everybody. It is between the Crown and the Māori. And please, if we get any of this information wrong, please correct us and we will make sure to post a correction. But not the haters. I'm not talking about the ones that follow the spew pages. I'm talking about legitimate corrections from the legitimate people in the community that I'm referring to. In our minds, altering these principles is actually breaking the original agreement without that mutual consent between the original parties, which is contrary to the spirit of democracy and partnership, in our opinion. Now, democracy in a treaty context should involve both parties to the original agreement having a say on how the principles are interpreted or even redefined, not one party and everybody else. Because we already know how that outcome is going to turn out, given that it's already happened in other countries, including our neighbouring country. And before people turn around and say that Māori came here by boat, you know, they took over from the Morioris, excuse my pronunciation, and please go and educate yourself on them in the Chatham Islands, because that would be really helpful for that narrative that I'm getting really sick and tired of seeing. So now, based on that, in our mind, a democratic approach respects the voices of all the parties involved originally, but especially those that it directly affects. So by attempting to define the new principles without the co-design or active Māori involvement, the bill is actually imposing unilateral definitions on a document that was foundational to the Māori and Crown relations. Now, this approach is actually going to silence the voices, which I know that the supporters are aware of, but it's going to silence them. Again, we are repeating history. Why are people choosing to support that form of history when the treaty was designed to actually protect? So thereby it reduces the democratic legitimacy of the process by the way that Seymour has gone and done this. Now, one of democracy, I just did it again. One of democracy's key roles is to protect minority rights, okay, against the tyranny of the majority. Now, the Treaty of Waitangi, or Te Tiriti, specifically, established the rights and protections for the Te Tiriti established rights and protections for Māori as a minority group. So changing the treaty principles in a way that reduces the protections or shifts the interpretations to diminish those rights is actually undermining democratic values that protect minority groups. So democratic societies apparently value transparency and accountability, but the original treaty principles have evolved to address historical injustices and serve as a framework for reconciliation. Now, by altering these principles, New Zealand is losing a key accountability mechanism that is actually holding the government responsible for upholding Māori rights, so it therefore weakens the democratic process by which past wrongs are acknowledged and rectified. Now, a core component of New Zealand's democracy is its commitment to biculturalism and recognising Māori as tangata whenua and honouring this in governance. So, reinterpreting treaty principles in a way that potentially minimises this partnership is undemocratic. It's disregarding the cultural foundation on which this country's democratic values are built. So, the bill aims to democratise the treaty principles, but it's actually leading to huge misunderstandings among our society and the public. And it is being fueled by people like Seymour and Hobson's Pledge, who have been trying to push this for a long time. I mean, I found an article in the New Zealand Herald from one of their members in 2017 that was already pushing the gravy train narrative. And now, I'm not even on all the other social media platforms. I'm literally only on YouTube and TikTok, and I am seeing it so much there. And Kay, who's on other social media platforms, has said, yeah, she's seeing it on there too. But at the end of the day, with the way that they use gravy train, everybody's on some form of gravy train, whether you want to admit it or not, based on the words that they're using. Now, the poorly defined democratised principles are actually diluting Māori rights, which people do know because they think that it is creating an equal situation for everybody. But it's actually misleading citizens into thinking that the treaty is unfairly privileging one group specifically. So it's fostering social division rather than cohesion, when it should be more about cohesion rather than division. And don't fucking sit there and turn around and say, well, Jacinda did this with the whole fucking Māori Health Authority. Did you not just hear me say this has been going on in our society for a very long time, before she was even a fucking prime minister? So get over it and learn some history. Focus on your own party as well as the other side. You might actually learn some shit. If you want a genuine democratic framework, then the changes or any discussion to the treaty principles is going to need a robust consultation process with the Māori as an equal partner. That is the spirit of democracy. That is respecting agreements. That is honouring commitments to equity and inclusion. But that's not everything. The stuff that was being put in place that everybody seemed to get their knickers in a twist about was where we start to get to the equal level that everybody is talking about, whether it be supporters of the bill or not. Unless it has affected you directly, you will never understand what it is like. Just take a look at any of the countries that have dual communities between Indigenous and specifically even just the British. Well, not even just the British, because Israel and Palestine is a good example. In America and over in Canada, you've also got Indigenous. Australia, you've got Indigenous communities. South Africa, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Out of all of those countries, where are the Indigenous communities? They're thriving by themselves as best as they can, while being pushed in the corner. Doesn't matter whether you want to choose to believe it or not. The facts are the facts are the facts are the facts. And just because we support one side or another side, and you might support the opposite side, it is not going to change that fact or reality, no matter how much people wish it into existence. Now, people have been in our comments and said, well, let's put it to a referendum. Let's have this democratic process and see what the people say. And I turn around and say, we already know what the people will say. And they're like, well, how do you know? Because at the end of the day, look at what happened to the other countries. Look at what happened to Australia and the Aboriginal community. Just being a decent human being with a heart and a brain, you can see this isn't okay, what is being done. We're going backwards. Whether you believe it or not, we are going backwards with this. Hence the hikoi that is currently taking place from both ends of the country to the middle, to the literal arsehole of New Zealand, We only call it the literal asshole of New Zealand because it's in the middle of the country. Kind of like where your butthole is. And the beehive's there with the 54th Parliament in it, so they're pretty much assholes in our opinion. But anyway, we've got systemic racism in this country, as well as they do in other countries. But we've got systemic racism. You want to achieve a genuinely democratic framework? Stop this whole conversation between everybody. Stop the hate. Stop the hurt. Stop the insults. Stop the being sucked in to some old fogey's friggin' hatred towards communities. It's actually quite funny. I found this video by fluke today, and it had this little part in it. Let me play it.
There was one group which featured frequently in spokesperson Don Brash's interviews.
The Maori ancestor, Maori, and Maori unelected tribal representatives, Maori.
Now, I know that's a soundbite, but how many times have you got to say it? Say all those words. Seriously. Don Brash has been pushing this for years. People didn't want to listen to him before. People didn't want him as a prime minister before, but now all of a sudden people want to listen to him. What's changed between then and now? He's still just as hateful towards the same community, and him and his buddies will turn around and say it's because they're sharing information, they're sharing important stuff, we can say this and that, and we can point and prove this. Why do you want the Foreshore and Seabed Act back? Is that because that situation alone will allow you to rip up the foreshore and seabed, privatise it and commercialise it, which Te Tiriti wouldn't allow you to do for multiple reasons? At least be honest with your rhetoric. Anyway, that's my opinion about that situation. That Nobson's pledge. If you want a truly genuine democratic process, then Māori representatives would have been involved in co-designing the consultation process itself. Their concerns would have been valued. Their perspectives would have shaped every aspect of how the treaty principles are reviewed or amended. Out of all the people involved, who was it? Who were the international experts on Indigenous rights, or the independent Māori or Pākehā experts? And I'm not talking the Canadian ones or the American ones. I'm talking about the legitimate ones. The ones that would help ensure that the process is free from the government bias and is actually held to a standard that respects Māori rights and interests as well. It doesn't matter whether that was signed generations ago. It's still part of everyone's family history. Whether you're a first generation, sixth generation New Zealander, it doesn't fucking matter. A contract is a contract is a contract, and it was signed knowing full well that there was going to be a future population of some form. You don't renegotiate your employment contract without talking about it yourself. You don't renegotiate your business loan contract, you don't let everybody renegotiate your business loan contract. So why are we doing it? So if these treaty principle bill supporters really wanted that whole equality and equity that they all talk and crow about, then involving Māori as equal partners in the decision making around the treaty principles would have been the first step. Doesn't mean that they would have said, yes, go ahead and do this, that and the other, but they're usually open to at least a discussion. At the moment, anybody who says that they don't support the bill, a lot of people are being told that they are bludgers, sympathisers, no-hopers, people who want to live in a dictatorship and all that sort of stuff. People say that Māori wards were undemocratic because we didn't have a referendum. Well, like I've seen many others turn around and say, where was the referendum on the rural wards? If one's undemocratic, then surely the other one is too. But no. The supporters have the ideology of do as I say, not as I do. What I think is correct and everything else is just bullshit. Or woke shit. Please, by all means, can some of those people learn what the word woke means? Properly. Not your version, the proper version. So, basically, in a nutshell, I could keep going on and give examples and stuff like that, but I actually came across a video on TikTok that explains it really, really well from someone within the community. So I'm actually going to play that video after this to finish it off, because I don't want to keep going on into things and make a mistake, because that is not my intention. This is just based on the stuff that Kay and I have been discussing in regards to the things that we already know, what we've read, what we've learned, all that sort of stuff. And if you are someone who truly wants equality in this country, then don't support the Treaty Principles Bill, because that is not a democratic bill. It has been cherry-picked as well, which was already proven ages ago. Before I play the video, thank you so much for joining. Sorry for the late episode and for the random switch. I will get better at these, if not this year, then at some stage. But in all honesty, like I said to someone in the comments on the weekend, we're not doing this for numbers. We're not doing this for money. We don't care how many subscribers we get. If we didn't even think we'd get past 10, and now we've got nearly 3,000 on TikTok, over 400 here, which was awesome because we didn't even think we'd get that far. We appreciate each and every single one of them. Whether they agree with us or not, that doesn't matter. We just appreciate them for actually staying informed, because at the end of the day, we don't want you to just come to our page. We want you to go to everyone's pages. Get the information. Critical thinking is key, because there is so much bullshit going on at the moment that you've got to learn to go with facts, not vibes. And that is all we are trying to do here on this page, is facts and not vibes. Anyway, have a beautiful day. Take care. See you next time.
David Seymour introduced the Treaty Principles Bill into Parliament yesterday, and so this is the quickest breakdown I can possibly do about why that's bad for anybody that doesn't have time to look into it. As a starting point, the Treaty Principles are already cooked. There's two ways that laws are made. One's through Parliament and the other one is through the courts. And the Treaty Principles are something that has come up through the courts. And this is because when the treaty was signed in 1840, there were two versions, one in Māori and the other in English. And the English and Māori version of the treaty don't match up, and that's one of the biggest issues with the Treaty of Waitangi. But a really key thing to remember is that the majority of Māori rangatira signed the Māori version. And absolutely nowhere in the Māori version does it say, we cede sovereignty. So all the arguments about Māori ceding sovereignty and the Queen having supreme power and all that kind of stuff come from the English version. But the reason we're not allowed to rely on that as a total kind of be-all and end-all is because most of the Māori signed the Māori version. One of the most important parts in the Māori version is that Māori were guaranteed tino rangatiratanga over their homes, over their lands and over their possessions or taonga. The rangatira of the time would have gone, well of course, like no doubt about that, but tino rangatiratanga would have been the closest possible word to sovereignty. And the word tino rangatiratanga has been studied for decades now, but what does tino rangatiratanga actually mean? And it's more than sovereignty, and it's a really special Māori concept about having self-determination, autonomy, mana motuhake, and sovereignty over yourself. And this guarantee of tino rangatiratanga under the Māori version of the Treaty of Waitangi is where a lot of the legal arguments of today stem from about what rights Māori should have under the treaty. And just as an example of this, if Māori were guaranteed tino rangatiratanga over their own homes under the Treaty of Waitangi, in what world did the Crown have the right to come into those homes and take Māori babies out of them? The answer is that they didn't have the right, they breached the treaty, and they did it in a way that caused harm for a lot of Māori whānau that have ended up perpetuating cycles of violence ever since that breach of the treaty. In the English version of the treaty, the tino rangatiratanga part is defined as undisturbed possession of lands and forests and stuff. And that is just so wrong when you understand the cultural context behind the word or the phrase tino rangatiratanga. There's no way they match up in any way. And just to remember that most of those rangatira only signed the version where they were guaranteed tino rangatiratanga, not undisturbed possession. So tino rangatiratanga was the closest possible word to sovereignty, but the Crown knew that Māori were never going to cede tino rangatiratanga, so they made up a word for sovereignty. And that word is kāwanatanga, which derives from the word kāwana, which means governor, because there were governors coming over from Britain. So the Māori version of the treaty says that the rangatira cede kāwanatanga to the Queen of England, which wasn't a word in the Māori vocabulary back then. So they would have gone, okay, you can have your kāwanatanga as long as I've got my tino rangatiratanga, that's sweet as. But this fundamental difference in meaning is the reason that we have the treaty principles. Because the Crown's going, hey, I've got full sovereignty, I can do whatever I want. And the Māori are going, no, you guaranteed me tino rangatiratanga and you've stomped all over that. And actually honouring the treaty and upholding the treaty would mean recognising tino rangatiratanga to its full extent, which is something that the Crown is just not prepared to do. So the courts have had to look at both versions of the treaty and go, guess we've got to find a middle ground. And this middle ground that the court found is not controversial at all, or it shouldn't be if you're a fair and reasonable person. Like, one of the principles is partnership, the Crown's supposed to work in partnership with Māori, because Māori have granted them the right to govern over Aotearoa, over New Zealand. Another one is protection. The Crown has a duty to protect Māori from the things that they brought over. And another one is good faith. The Crown has to work in good faith with Māori. Is that so hard? But it is so hard because the Crown would like to pretend that Māori ceded sovereignty and they have no specific guaranteed rights under the Treaty of Waitangi, which is a lie that someone like David Seymour is able to push so hard, because most people don't understand the history and the context in which the Treaty of Waitangi was signed, and they don't want to teach it in schools, although we are going to get it in schools. But that's why we're at this point where they're able to push this kind of lie and twist things and manipulate things, because most people don't have the time, like me, to sit around and read articles about the history and the context behind the Treaty of Waitangi and the difference in the translations, and this is all academic stuff that most people don't have the time to sit around and bother with. And that's exactly why I'm making this video. But the key part about David Seymour's bill that I actually want to talk about, or just explain with that context behind it, is that he's trying to redefine tino rangatiratanga. His new bill redefines the second article of the treaty to say that everyone in New Zealand gets tino rangatiratanga. And you might think, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. But the issue with that is that it takes tino rangatiratanga out of its cultural context and makes it pretty much null and void. Everyone has human rights. Everyone has property rights. Everyone has the right not to be assaulted. But not everyone was guaranteed tino rangatiratanga under the Treaty of Waitangi. And this is one of the big issues with the bill, is that David Seymour is trying to say tino rangatiratanga applies to everyone, which basically means it applies to no one. So there's 3 readings in Parliament and it has to pass all 3 before it actually becomes law. And National and New Zealand First have said they're not going to support the bill past the first reading, which means the ACT Party won't have enough support to actually make this bill law. But we're not praising National or New Zealand First for that, because that's less than the bare minimum. This bill should never have been given money to be drafted. ACT was the party that yapped on about trying to save the country money, and National's supposed to be the big economy saver, and here they are wasting money on a bill that they've already said they're not going to pass, and also is stupid. It's objectively a stupid bill. But one silver lining I am hoping comes from this bill is, first of all, the toi Te Tiriti hikoi is going to be unreal, and then secondly, hopefully more people will look into the historical context and the cultural context behind the Treaty of Waitangi as a result of this bill, which would be really cool, because having more people that actually understand the treaty is always going to help. So, silver lining.